Welcome to Human School. I'm your host, Dr. Patil Armenian. After 4 years of college, 4 years of medical school, 4 years of residency, and 2 years of fellowship, I thought I was done. I did my time, got my degrees, and now I was just gonna live life. Well, think again. Some of my greatest schooling has come after my formal education was complete, and it keeps on coming. Join me at Human School, where we can learn together. I'm an emergency physician and medical toxicologist working at a large teaching hospital in California. I'm also a mom, wife, sister, daughter, and friend. Whether you work in healthcare or not, you too lead a busy life. Together, let's work on how we can thrive in all of our real-world roles. On this podcast, we'll dig deep into what it means to constantly learn and evolve, to be human. Every other week, I'll share some of my personal stories, interview inspiring people, and offer tools to help you learn more about yourself. Being on the front lines in the ER, you learn a lot about life and death. And though my philosophies were born in a busy emergency room, they can apply to anyone trying to live a joyful life here on Earth. Please listen, share, and subscribe to this podcast, available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcasts. Follow me on Instagram at Human School Podcast, and feel free to let me know what topics or guests you want to hear about. And if you like the podcast, don't forget to rate and review it. Hi, everyone, and welcome to Human School. Today I have on with me a very special co-host, my sister, Garin Hussenjian.
Hi, everyone.
Now, I'm sure we're going to have a lot of episodes where my sister Garin comes on to air her thoughts and tell us her stories. Today, we decided to do our first episode talking about something that we haven't talked about yet. So our first conversation on this is going to be right here on the podcast. And we're going to talk about actually another podcast series called The Retrievals, done through Serial and reported by Susan Burton, who really did an amazing job breaking down the story of a fertility clinic associated with the Yale University Medical Center. Now, I do want to just really put in a disclaimer right from the start that there are a lot of spoilers here. We're going to be discussing that whole podcast series and how it affected us and what we think about it. So if you don't want the spoilers, first go and listen to The Retrievals. It's 5 parts. Each one is pretty short, about 30 to 40 minutes. So it's a great listen, and then come back and listen to our discussion. Now, let me lay the groundwork for this story. In The Retrievals, we go through the really very fascinating story of what happens at one Yale University hospital fertility clinic and what all the women there go through. And the long and short of it is that they undergo a pretty intense procedure called an egg retrieval, which is where a needle is pierced into a woman's ovaries, typically while they're sedated and with good pain control, to harvest eggs. To get to this point, a woman in the fertility process has to be injecting herself with multiple medications for weeks. It takes a lot to even get to that point. And then the procedure itself is called an egg retrieval. And this is where an egg is taken out. And at that point, it's either frozen or fertilized by a sperm, and then the embryo is frozen to be used later in order to have a baby. Now, what happened at this clinic, though, was that there was a nurse who was replacing pretty much all of the fentanyl, which is a very strong opioid analgesic pain medication used in these procedures, with saline. The bottom line is that those women were undergoing pretty massive, painful procedures without pain medications. And then the podcast goes on to go through, well, what was going on with the nurse that even did this, what was going on with the clinic, what were the outcomes, what was the sentence of the nurse once she went to federal court and was prosecuted for this offense. and a lot of detail. But the reason why my sister and I wanted to talk about this is because it really kind of hits us close to the chest, right?
Yeah, absolutely.
To give you guys some background on us and I guess medically what we've been through, major medical things in our lives. I myself have gone through 3 egg retrievals in a 4.5 year long fertility process to have my now 6-year-old son. And so I've been through every type of fertility procedure you could think of. And in the end, did 3 retrievals with IVF. And my sister is a soon to be breast cancer survivor. And she herself has been through some procedures. Why don't you tell us what procedures you've been through?
Yeah, when we discovered that I had breast cancer in July of 2022, the procedure started with rounds of chemotherapy, which are done at a clinic where you receive infusions through a port. So that was you're sitting, you're getting your medication. The biggest procedure during that process was after chemotherapy completion. I had a double mastectomy and straight to breast implant surgery. That was in December, and I'm still feel the pain on my left side, which is where the breast and lymph nodes that were cancerous were removed. The surgery is complete, but I'm absolutely still recovering from that. After surgery, I did a month of daily radiation, and currently I'm doing infusions every 3 weeks, which, as the doctor says, should have no side effects. But of course, when you're pumping yourself with medication, there are side effects. So it's an ongoing medical journey that's lasted now a little over a year.
Yeah, and every human body is so different. And so, of course, we have to listen to what you're saying. And I felt, the same way. I'll just clarify, by the way. Well, I think most people listening who've listened to the intro know that I'm a doctor. I'm an ER doctor and a toxicologist. So I'm in this medical setting a lot. And you know what's really special about ER doctors is we can sense out other doctors really well because we have to deal with consultants all the time. And I will say that your oncologist, who's your
Mm-hmm.
cancer specialist, your 2 surgeons, your
Yep.
radiation oncologist, and your main nurse, Billy,
Yep.
have been exceptional.
I totally agree. This is the best case scenario
Best
where I've
case.
had fantastic caregivers and actually very good care. The best case scenario still has emotional repercussions, physical pain, and mental stress and trauma, let alone what we're about to talk about, which is an actual nightmare of care.
Yeah, the best case scenario. And I too, I'll say, I don't remember my retrievals. I was under really good anesthesia. I had a great anesthesiologist that took care of me. I had great sedation with both fentanyl and propofol for my procedures. My doctor was very kind. So I still had the physical repercussions and the emotional repercussions. And of course, the existential crisis of, oh, are we even supposed to be alive and procreating on this planet? All of that. And it was still hard. So now, how did you feel when you started hearing the story reported by Susan Burton on this podcast called The Retrievals?
Well, the first episode, which kind of lays the groundwork for the following episodes and what happened, I was really identifying with what you experienced. I was thinking the whole time listening to this, and I was actually texting you too. Like, oh my God, P, did you feel pain? And I have not had that kind of fertility experience, but hearing about it for the first time, I was actually just thinking about you, what you went through. I know, you came to Los Angeles. You stayed at our home after your third egg retrieval procedure, which we're so excited Cebu was born from. But I saw your pain that following day. You were in bed, you had great discomfort. So the whole time I was listening, I was initially just thinking about you. Later, I was, of course, riveted by the story for the following episodes, but I was shocked. I kept texting you, did you feel pain? What was your experience like? And you shared that following the retrievals, you were in pain.
Yeah, I was. Actually, with all three of them, I had pain. With the first two, I believe that I had something called ovarian hyperstimulation syndrome, which is where your ovaries get stimulated too much. And that can, in some cases, actually be life threatening, but in most cases, causes a lot of pain. And again, I'm not a gynecologist, so don't get mad at me if I get details wrong. But anyway, with that third time, that was actually my most comfortable one yet. And you still saw me in pain. And I had a great doctor who had me on good pain medications. I also did acupuncture before and after the procedures for pain control, which helped me a lot. And yet, all of these women, and I'm going to say hundreds of women at this point, have
Hmm.
now come forward and said that they went through these procedures really without pain control. Now, in some of them, they had the sedating medicine, so they were a little sleepy, but they didn't have pain control. And in some of them, they were wide awake. I mean, wide
Yeah,
awake.
yeah. But let me just ask you a clarifying question about sedation versus pain control. I did hear in the podcast, some of the patients were sedated, they were slightly sleepy. Therefore, you're sleepy, but you are still feeling pain. Is that correct?
I'm so glad you asked that. So, yes, so there are medications that can make you sleepy, but don't actually have any pain control. Now, there are some pain medicines, like very strong opioids, such as fentanyl, for example, that can make you sleepy and have pain control. But usually, in a procedural sedation, we like to give something to make someone sleepy as well as something to control their pain at the same time. Now, there are certain medicines that are like a 2-for-1 deal. They do both. Ketamine
Yeah.
is one of those. We use that in procedural sedation a lot. But most times you're giving both.
So it's even more horrifying for me to think about the women who were drowsy and sleepy, yet also feeling pain. They couldn't even articulate it as well as the women who were completely wide awake.
Yeah,
And I
so
just want to, yeah,
they're still feeling it, but they
yeah,
can't say anything. It's horrifying. It's like being in a nightmare you can't get yourself out of.
right. And I'd love to talk about the fact that across the board, hundreds of women, while experiencing this, were communicating with the doctors and the nurses while they were laying down on the table during the procedure, saying very clearly, I am in pain. I can feel everything you are doing.
Yeah. But then it's like, well, we have to do the procedure at this exact time because otherwise the eggs are going to ovulate, which is the eggs are going to start popping out and we're going to lose these eggs. So all the time you spent, all the thousands of dollars you spent to get to this point are going to be for nothing. So we're just going to charge ahead and do this instead of maybe just stopping for a second and being like, okay, let's go get some more medications or try something else. And I will say, on the toxicology standpoint of things, frankly, if you're monitoring somebody properly, there is no maximum for these medicines. Truly, it's however much it takes to adequately sedate them and to control their pain. And it's not just in this setting. I mean, I have worked in the ER for many years now, and I have seen procedures done by other people without adequate pain control. Sometimes they've, stopped and told the nurses, okay, let's go get more things. Or sometimes I've been the person saying, you got to stop right now. We're going to get you more medications that you can use on this patient, and then you can proceed with your procedure. But also, I work with a lot of really strong nurses who would just say flat out, we're not doing this, and not until you control this person's pain.
Right. one of the things that was happening to these women at the Yale clinic was the nurse in charge of their pain and the nurse present during their procedure was the nurse stealing the fentanyl. Therefore, that same person was not going to give anything for pain reduction. That was the person doing the crime.
Yes. It's wild.
I mean, it is wild on many levels. You're having this procedure, you're in pain. The person in charge of your care is actually the person who is causing your pain. It's very, very emotionally just a killer.
We're going to skip forward,
Mm-hmm.
but it turns out that that same nurse went through IVF herself.
Unbelievable. That was a turn of events. First of all, great storytelling and kind of leading up to that. She understands this experience, unlike the doctors, even the male doctors who are doing the procedure. And yet she would inflict that upon other women.
I mean, this is just proof that addiction really is a terrible disease. She clearly wasn't even in her right mind to do
Yeah,
something like that to
right.
someone else. And that being said, it's still hard for me to sympathize when I was the person on that other side. Thankfully, I had great experiences with my pain control, but I mean, it's traumatizing having to even go through IVF in the first place.
What was really hard for me to hear, and I knew this from your own experience, is the urgency of timing. And the fact that this is not like something you could do at any random time. You have to have a short window where you have done all the shots at home on your own, which is something else we should talk about. You've gotten through everything. You're now at this pre-ovulation window, and is it hours?
Yeah, it's on the order of hours, maybe even like within an hour. You're like, this is the time. And even your shots are timed, by the way. I would have to do my shots at specific exact times.
Yeah, I remember you had your alarms for all those shots.
Hmm.
So, what I want to emphasize here is the women experiencing this excruciating pain while simultaneously realizing that this is my only opportunity for this month of all the work we've done leading up to this moment, literally a moment, and you do not have the ability to reschedule or say, I'm not happy with my care right now. We need to stop. We need to reassess.
No, you can't, because it's not just the time, it's not just the money, which we're talking about thousands of dollars of medications and procedures leading to that point that insurance probably doesn't cover. For example,
Yep.
my insurance didn't cover a single penny of any of this, but the emotion, the desperation of like, this is my last chance. Like for me, I remember I kept thinking, how many times can I go through a retrieval before I start getting bad effects, maybe down the line from that? I mean, we don't know. I heard, there was a woman that she had done 8 retrievals, and it's like, I would never have done that for myself. Like when I was doing the third one, I thought, okay, third time's the charm. Like the
Mm-hmm.
first 2, we got nothing out of those. I got a ton of eggs, but nothing, panned out. So it is this desperation of, that's it. This is my chance to have a kid. And I could see being in that position and being like, fine, you know what? I'm going to lay here. I'm going to go through this, frankly, medieval torture so that I can have the outcome that I want for my family.
And that's exactly what those women did. And down the line, when it came out that the fentanyl was being siphoned off, the women who had successful babies being born were then slightly judged by the lawyers or people who are trying to bring this to light by saying, well, didn't you have a successful process? You have a baby. So what are you complaining about? And so this goes back to what we tolerate in society with women voicing and communicating concern, self advocacy, and whether that's in the medical realm or other realms in our workplace, that women are often just told to just be quiet and shut up. Take it, tolerate it, suck it up. That's really what came across during this podcast, too. That it's a story very specific to retrievals and IVF, but it also talks about what are women, where is women's place in society with these levels of communication, and how seriously are women taken when they're voicing concern about something.
Yeah, it's a universal story, and not just in medicine, I agree, but in society at large. Just to go back to medicine for a second, though, I mean, it is a well known fact that heart attacks are detected less often in women than in men because women might have some slightly atypical symptoms, like they'll have nausea and some indigestion, and actually, that's them having their heart attack.
Mm-hmm.
But it's not taken seriously. And so heart disease is detected less often in women than in men. And then it just goes on in other topics. And that's the thing. It's like that mentality of, well, you have your baby now. Aren't you satisfied? It's like,
Right.
no, I have my baby now. I have a
Yeah.
6-year-old. I'm still pissed that I had to go through this. And I still am somewhat traumatized by the stuff I went through. And I had probably one of the best possible experiences. So it's not enough. And okay,
Mm-hmm.
outcomes. Some had babies, but I really believe that if your body is under physical stress, for example, from extreme pain, you're not going to have successful outcomes. And those are the things you can't measure. For example, these women were in a lot of pain, and then they were getting fresh embryo transfers, which means they're still in pain 5 days later while they're still having a lot of belly pain. They're like, okay, let's put the embryo in and see if it's going to take. And that, for my body, specifically me, I knew that wasn't going to work, but that's how my first clinic did it.
Mm-hmm.
And when I heard this was happening to the women in the Retrievals podcast, I thought, oh, yeah, that was one of the things that I felt didn't work in me. Maybe because, for example, I was in so much pain and discomfort. I was like, my body's not going to take anything right now. I need to let
Yeah.
it rest, let myself normalize, and then freeze the thing. And then you can pop that embryo in when my body is back to normal. And that's actually when I had my successful outcome.
Mm-hmm.
But in the case of these women, I thought, well, if they were in so much pain and then they were immediately having the embryo implantation procedure, maybe they were having lower success rates because their body's under too much stress to take this. And again, that's just me talking about my own experience. I'm not a reproductive endocrinologist, but that's just my opinion. And then even later, they're going to have distrust, they're going to have stress. And so, yeah, maybe their success rates for having a successful pregnancy is going to be lower.
Right. And those are the things that are not quantifiable. So this is where it goes back to things are fuzzy. It's a fuzzy part of the science, but yet very valid. And so what if it's fuzzy? These are things that are not being taken into account. And I think that that goes to show the bias in medicine, that taking an emotional consideration into account in a medical situation is not considered valuable. And I think that's a problem because we're working, by the way, you and I, P, have been working on so much spiritual things and so many spiritual things in our path, right? We understand, and I hope people understand holistically, that we are emotional, mental, physical beings. It's a whole system. And the stress that you feel physically will absolutely affect things. I believe that that's the same kind of stress that created my breast cancer. The cells, started multiplying. That's a reaction to stress as well. A stress in the body, a stress in my environment.
Yeah, and at the same time, when you have your good outcome and my good outcome were then tied into, I mean, really for the both of us, acknowledging those stresses and slowly dealing with them, and then really approaching it with a yes and mentality of, yes, we're going to do all of the Western medical treatments available. We're also going to do, everything else in addition on the side. We're going to talk about this in some other episodes, all the
Mm-hmm.
other things we've done, but we really believe in a yes and approach. It doesn't have to be this or that. You can do all of it. But of course, at the core is like, yeah, if you're under immense physical stress from this unanticipated pain, then yeah, your outcome is going to be worse. And you know what? We can't really quantify that. And we don't have to. We can just listen to people and what they have to say.
And people in the podcast, some of the women interviewed, did talk about that, talked about the concern they felt about the level of pain during the procedure and how that may have affected the retrieval process. One of the women shared that she was voicing so much concern of pain that she's actually not sure if the doctor did retrieve all the eggs. And these are things we'll never know. They'll never know.
Yeah, and maybe the doctor doesn't even know.
Exactly.
So we were talking about outcomes a little bit, and the main outcome being, was there a healthy pregnancy and was there a baby born? But let's just talk about outcomes in general. What do we even mean by outcomes?
Right. Like some of the women had babies. That's an outcome specific to their IVF process. But there were lawsuits related to their experience later. What really resonated with me was how one of the women was trying to quantify, what do I want as an outcome to this horrific experience I've had? What would possibly kind of bring closure to this? What is a viable outcome that I'm seeking? She wasn't really able to answer that, which goes to show how challenging it is to even know what we may want. I mean, do you want to lock someone up behind bars who has an addiction and made bad choices and affected hundreds of other women? Outcomes are so complicated that no, that didn't solve anything. A lot of the women talked about how they would really advocate for drug rehab and recovery for that nurse who committed these crimes because this is a drug addiction problem. But the pain that these women experienced, what is an outcome that would sufficiently ease that?
Well, I think to me, an outcome that we didn't see, which might have helped, is really a better response from the clinic and the university. And so you could have a bad player, right? You can have a bad egg here and there. But what you want to see is for there to be positive change from that, of like, we agree with you. This was awful. Now we have all these processes in place in our clinics so that nobody ever has to go through this again. And that's actually what, at least in the podcast reporting of this, we haven't seen yet. And even, even just to have that letter of, you were in this clinic at this time, maybe you were subjected to this, but we don't think you had any negative outcome from that. First off, that letter was bogus.
Right.
And then secondly, there was a whole other subset of women earlier possibly identified that never had any knowledge. And they are probably listening to the retrievals now and thinking, oh my God, that's me. That
And
happened
one
to
of
me.
and that did happen. In the final episode, that was brought up that women who have begun listening or women who had just heard the trailer started realizing I may have had that experience because this really sounds like what I had happened to me.
Exactly.
The big hang up here with a positive outcome is that the Yale University medical system has not admitted any kind of real guilt or concern and then done and shown action. And the reason is money. They're like, oh, we don't want to have 100 or 1,000, a class action lawsuit. I think that's all it comes down to. So they're trying to cover their own behind, but they're just not doing the right thing as an organization. And
And
this actually happens in a lot of organizations.
it does. I mean, I don't want to drag their name through the mud because I could see this happening at a lot of places. And then, unfortunately, something that people might not know is that if something is under litigation, which this currently is, they're not going to be releasing details out into the public. So maybe now their clinics are different. Maybe they have a Pyxis machine that dispenses all the medications. They probably do. I don't know of a single clinic now that doesn't. Maybe they only use anesthesiologists now, which they should. Maybe they always use propofol now. Maybe they're listening to the pain complaints better. But we just don't know because they're not allowed to talk about it.
And I can imagine while that is absolutely the realistic situation, I can imagine how that silence is so deafening and hard for the women who went through this process.
Yeah. Because at the end of the day, you want to hear an I'm sorry, this will never happen again. We've looked into it and we've made specific changes. And yeah, we don't have that in this case. I
Right.
know of plenty of other cases in hospital settings where things like that have happened, and then the hospital reaches out to the family saying, "Look, these are the things we've now instituted so that this never happens to somebody else ever again." But again, we don't know. And so that's what's really hard here, cuz then you think, could this happen again with
Yeah.
someone else addicted to fentanyl? I
Yeah.
mean, there are so many people addicted to fentanyl and other drugs. So, is this so rare of a story for a medical professional to steal medications? No, it's
Probably
not.
not. It's
No,
not.
it's not. It's not. That's where you want to hear, okay, this is the things we've done for this to never happen again. So that at
Right.
least you're like, okay, moving forward, someone else doesn't have to go through this torture.
And that's what we haven't heard on this podcast, that a strong stance was made in support of future change to never have this experience happen to women again. No one has heard that. So yeah, I understand that okay, you can't say anything now because this case is under litigation. But it's just very hard to rationalize still.
We don't have a good conclusion. I think what is still important is that the story is out there and so many thousands of people are listening to it and talking about it now. And, I heard about this from one of my colleagues in the emergency department. Since then, I think we've disseminated it to so many other people. But these are the conversations that we need to be having, and not just women's pain, but everybody's pain. Are we listening to people? Are we taking care of them appropriately? Are we inflicting more harm than good?
Absolutely. One of the things that is very important that I realized after listening to this whole podcast is we need to believe people when they express something. And again, I totally agree, not just women, men, we're all living here together on this planet. If someone is voicing concern, believe them. Don't just, sweep it under the rug, tell them to get tough. It'll be over soon. You can do it. No, there's something to maybe adjust and change. And this isn't just about pain management. I'm talking about, and we've talked a lot about this, P, what people in the planet need to do for each other in every environment. I feel that way about my current employer, and I don't work in the medical system. I want to share an injustice and I want that to be heard. And like these women, I don't know my own personal outcome that I'm looking for. It's very hard to change a large organization's practices. It feels like going up against a beast. And I'm sure that's what a lot of these women felt until they all started to hear each other's voices. Because we have to understand that each of these women, these were individual life moments. It didn't come out until much later when they all got that letter saying, you may have had some, not perfect care, but we think the outcomes were fine. That's when all the women start to collectively come together to say, hey, we all experienced something here. So for a long time, it was shrouded under the cloud of just individual experiences. And that's where people feel powerless. The individual shuts down, it gets quiet. But we have to believe that within community, we can find strength.
Yeah, there's so much power in the collective. And
Absolutely.
I think a lot of us go through things quietly and we don't talk about them. And it's always like, well, don't talk about it unless it's done or unless you have that positive outcome. And actually, until you start talking and start embracing community and sharing your story, you're going to be an island just floating in the nothingness. And humans are not designed that way. And so, through sharing these stories, having these discussions, we're fostering that sense of community and being a more functional human, really. I mean, I know for me, for my last round of IVF, the first two, I didn't talk about it with anyone. Barely anybody knew. I felt very ashamed, even like within our family. I just
Yeah.
wouldn't talk about it. And then the last one was when I decided to kind of tell all my friends what was going on, tell my family what was going on. We came and stayed at your house
Yep.
and then really everybody, it felt like a big party the whole way.
Mm-hmm.
Even when I was doing my shots, we had friends staying in our guest house, and so we would have swimming parties every day, and then I would be like, okay, shot break, and then they would drink shots and then I would inject myself with the medications. So
I
it was like
remember.
we really like made it a community thing, and that's when it worked.
Right. I had the same kind of experience when, and you know this, that when I first got the news of my breast cancer, I could not share, could not talk, took all the steps alone, and I really isolated myself. And I think you were the only person who I let into my very isolated bubble. It was very hard for me to share that news. I also felt ashamed. Like, how did I get sick? In the same way that you shame your body for having not done what's expected of your body.
Yes.
And so you judge your body. I
Hmm.
cannot believe my cells are multiplying like crazy and now I have cancer. Body, why did you do that? Just like you might have felt, body, why are you not having a baby naturally?
Hmm.
And it was hard for me to even admit it to myself because I thought I was so healthy. And then I had the cancer diagnosis. It was a shock. You go into isolationist mode for survival.
Definitely. And then you slowly started telling people and getting into community, and I think that really helped with your recovery.
Absolutely. Yeah. I started to share, and the emotional support. I actually started accepting the emotional support, the love, the community. Same with you, with your third round.
Definitely.
Yeah.
The Retrievals podcast really just opened up all these memories and discussion points. And I think the key is to know that at the end of the day, everybody is going through something. And sometimes you don't even realize the shared experiences you're having until you start telling your story to others.
Yeah. So I think it's important to, yes, we have moments of isolation and processing, but come out of that and find your group, talk to the people that love you, and start to voice yourself.
And then when someone's voicing themselves, believe them.
Listen to them. Yeah.
Yes. Well, thank you so much for coming on the podcast,
Oh my
Garin.
gosh, it was such a pleasure, Patil. We have been meaning to do this for a while, and so we did it.
All right. See you next time. Please like, subscribe, share, and download the podcast. And again, you can find us at Human School Podcast on Instagram. I'd like to thank Dr. Zach Effron for the theme music. And I'd just like to make a general disclaimer that any of the institutions I work for, including Community Regional Medical Center, UCSF Fresno, and American Ambulance, have nothing to do with any of my thoughts or opinions. And so we'll kindly leave them out of this. Thanks, everyone. See you next time.